Hey guys, how's it going? Thank you so much for coming back for another episode. Fantastic. You have no excuses at this point. Excited, a little bit nervous today. We're going to be jumping into, I'd say, what the rest of these things are going to probably be a bit more like. You know, the first episode there was just kind of a me telling of my story, which was a bit easier for me because how could you get it wrong? But this one's going to be have a little more ideology, a little more thoughts and about a concepts as opposed to just me talking about stuff that happened to me. But I'm excited about it too, and I'm so glad you're back, and I hope you enjoy it. I did mention last week that I was going to re-listen to it and possibly have things to say. I did re-listen to it. I actually, thought it was fairly decent for trying to get my life into half an hour or less. But I was struck when I listened to last week's podcast how I kind of got these feelings again of when I became a Christian and in the subsequent years after that, with my family not being, what kind of a wedge that sort of drove between us. That might be a bit much, that language, but I'm going with it. It drove a wedge between us. No, but it distanced us, and we had such a great thing going that sometimes I look back and think, man, I kind of blew that by doing this, following this path, because our house would have been better if I just didn't. It's tough. I did what I thought was right at the time. I'm not apologizing for it, even though I am still Canadian. I'm not saying sorry about the path that I took. I took the path for a whole bunch of reasons. Some I was aware of, some I wasn't. But I do regret any distance or weird relations I've had with my family since then. I do feel like, here we are almost 25 years later. We figured it out. By and large, I care for my family a great deal. I enjoy their company. I feel like I can be honest with them, and they still invite me to things, so they must like me as well, to a degree. So I don't think it's cost us our family or our relationship, but it's had a real price tag, and I was reminded of that when I listened to that episode, and it made me think, man, I want to do a better job of being close with my family, my parents and my brother. And, hopefully through this, maybe I can get to a better place to do that from. I don't know. We'll see. But, yeah, I think that was it from that episode. Let's get going with episode 2 here. We're going to focus today on the Christian doctrine of salvation. It's a really big one, and it's kind of at the heart of the Christian faith. So we're not starting with like an easy one, This ain't no softball. We're rolling our sleeves up and we're getting right in here. Again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive, university level discourse on salvation. So if you're expecting that, get out now. This is According to Dave podcast. So this is the stuff that I find interesting, fascinating, valuable, and also the stuff that really rubs me the wrong way. And so this is, from my perspective, and that's what it's going to be. I'm going to start off here by kind of explaining very quickly what I believe Christian salvation is, what the kind of story is, which many of you will probably be familiar with. And then we'll get into what I like about it and what I don't like about it. Okay? Let's do it. All right. So essentially, my understanding of Christian salvation is essentially the story kind of told in the Bible is, God creates men and women in his image, whatever that means, allows man to make choice, gives free choice, whatever that means. Man eventually chooses his own way. Man falls, by choosing sin, missing the mark, going against what God wants man to do. Man chooses his own way, and that causes a break in the relationship. So God and man's relationship was good at the start. Man chose a different way. Relationship breaks down. And then essentially, most of the Old Testament is the story of God and man trying to reconnect, trying to, proclaim what was lost. Ultimately, those efforts don't work, and so God sends his son, Jesus, who's also himself, because, why make it easy, to earth. And Jesus lives a life as a person. Although he is still God, he's also fully human, whatever that means. And ultimately dies a sinner's death, even though he's not guilty, is dead for a few days, gets raised again by God. And the story sort of indicates that, hey, if you believe in that, if you accept what Jesus did as forgiveness for what you've done, that you can then have new life with him. That relationship we had with God back in the Garden of Eden when this all started and was good, we can have that again because Jesus opened the way back to God. So the purpose of that, of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, was restoring these broken relationships. Okay? So that's how I understand salvation to sort of work in a kind of quick way. I think it is important for me to note here that when I became a Christian, I did not do it responding to a doctrine. I actually wasn't really very well versed on Christian doctrine at the time. I responded to what I talked about this last week, to what I believe to be a real presence. I believe I encountered the presence of God myself. I'm not sure I still believe that, but I definitely believed it at the time. And I was responding to that presence. And because that presence happened in a Christian context, I took that to mean this Christianity is true. And it was only after I was sort of in that I really learned the doctrine. Actually, the only doctrine that I can remember learning before that was someone handed me a tract, like a little pamphlet, and it said, "How do you know if the Bible's true?" on it. And this was before I became a Christian, and I looked at it, I thought, oh, that's interesting. Hey, how do you know the Bible's true? And I took it home and I went to my room and I opened it up and I started reading it. And I was expecting it's been, discovered by these people and, here's these other texts that, no. I opened the first page. I was like, wow, this is a really skinny pamphlet to explain this big topic. And the first page, it was basically just saying Bible verses that said that the Bible was true. So all scripture is God-breathed, And it was like, even at the time, as a 15 or 16-year-old idiot, I knew this was probably not the way you should make your case. You can't use the Bible to say that would be like me taking a piece of paper and saying, you should give Dave all your money, and then underneath that writing, this is true. And then me handing that to someone and saying, you got to give me all your money. And how do you know that that's a true thing? Well, look right below it. It says this is true. That's essentially the same logic. So I didn't have a great view of sort of some of the doctrine I had heard earlier, but again, I was responding to this presence. So over the years, after I became a Christian, was involved in church and church life, eventually worked at the church, I sort of got the doctrine kind of explained to me in different ways by different people at different times. And some of the stuff I heard I really liked, and I'm going to and found inspirational. And some of the stuff I heard I really didn't like and found depressing and even alarming. And so we're going to talk about both of those today. The first, what I want to focus on is the inspirational stuff. I'm a positive guy. Let's start positive. One thing that I noticed right away, and I remember when I first became a Christian, I started reading the Bible from the start, Genesis, Exodus, whatever, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, whatever. And I also started reading a book by C.S. Lewis, who did the Narnia stuff, if you're into those things. He wrote a book called Mere Christianity, which is kind of a kind of a explanation of the basics of Christianity from his mind. And I thought it was a really great book, interesting read. And something that I gained from both of those readings was essentially Christianity and the salvation story, which, if you remember, talked about man, God creating man in his image, right? And then man falls. So there's these kind of two realities about people. One is God made us and in some way imprinted himself on us. We're in his image, and it's not a physical image, unless God looks like a big human, but I don't think so. It's in kind of a spiritual, sort of metaphysical way, we somehow resemble God. But at the same time, we've also fallen. So we have this fallen, sinful brokenness about us. And I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, that's really interesting and fascinating to me, because to me, that does explain my experience of people. People are capable of such beauty and nobility and kindness, and are also capable of such horrific acts of debauchery. And those aren't two different people. That's the same person is capable of both of those things. And I knew that in myself. That's true about me. I'm capable of those two things. There was a Russian philosopher, I forget his name, who said the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either. You listen to that, Republicans and Democrats. Good and evil doesn't draw directly between the two parties. Just get that in there. But right through every human heart. The line separating good and evil passes right through every human heart. And I believe that's true. I believe we are animals capable of good and evil, each one of us. So I really appreciated that explanation of the human condition, which I hadn't heard put like that before. Another thing I like about the story is Jesus. That's going to be a recurring theme in these things. I really think Jesus is great, which makes my difficulties with Christianity so painful for me, because I just want to like Jesus, and just let me do that, okay? He says a lot of cool stuff and does a lot of cool stuff, and I like him. And I like people that like him. In this story, Jesus is this hero figure. He kind of comes in when all is lost. He does these amazing teachings. He has this crazy understanding of the Torah. He's followed, but he's also rejected by the authorities who are threatened by him. And it's this great, kind of underdoggy kind of story. It's got drama and all this stuff. And then ultimately, the ultimate kind of act of salvation, him going up on that cross and suffering and dying, I mean, it's this beautiful expression of sacrificial love. And I think as humans, we are somehow, some way, I don't know why, hardwired to love and appreciate and, I don't know, just be inspired by a good sacrificial love story. And this is not just a Christian thing. I mean, you see this in myths and legends of old. You see it in modern storytelling. I mean, heck, you watch just about any Marvel movie, and it's got a sacrificial love theme running through it. You think of Tony Stark, snapping his finger. He dies, gives up his life so that others can live, right? We're inspired by that, and we're hit by that. That's the Jesus figure in this story. He's good. He doesn't deserve it, but he takes it on willfully so that the other people he loves can have life. I mean, this is a guy who up on the cross, he's getting, he's got nails through his hands and his feet. He's getting speared in the side. He's getting mocked. He's taking on the sin of the world, the weight of that on his shoulders. And he looks up to heaven and says, God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's inspirational stuff. And it has an effect on you. Another thing that's just interesting to me about Jesus, the figure, is that, he became, part of that salvation story is he becomes a human. He gets born into this existence. Think about that. God decides to live a life as a person. I don't know how that works. He's fully God. He's fully man. I don't understand it. But crazy. He grew up. He had to learn how to walk and talk. And, he probably burped and farted and was embarrassed. He probably had horrible acne as a kid. The Bible talks about he grew up and became a carpenter. Like, what if he was an awful carpenter? And people would be like, oh, yeah. Someone brought the chair back because it broke. And they're like, oh, yeah, friggin' Jesus made that. He doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he was a person. And then, it talked about on that cross how God turns his face away. There's this moment on the cross where God sort of turns away, removes his kind of presence from Jesus. And I've heard Christian speakers and teachers talk about that and say, look, Jesus, the person you're praying to, Jesus, knows what it's like to be uncomfortable and be embarrassed and live a human life. Hey, you feel forsaken by God? You feel like God has turned his gaze from you? You feel alone? God, the God you worship has felt that. I don't know how. He is God. How could he be? But don't think about it. That's what it says. But the idea that the God I'm praying to and worship and value in Jesus knows what it's like to feel forsaken by God connects me to him and him to me in a way that I don't think you get with the gods of many other religions. Fascinating stuff. And not just Jesus, but the kind of God the Father figure in parts of this salvation story, it's really beautiful. Just the basic ethos of, here's a situation. The relationship is broken. No one can make it right. And it's been broken for probably good reasons. And God, who is the innocent one, decides to humble himself and come down and meet with and be with and live with us, the guilty ones. Okay? Just from that perspective, how many times do I have someone in my life who wronged me and who I consider myself to be in the right, and I consider them to be the party who wronged me? And maybe there's been some casual attempts at reconciliation, but it's not right yet. If I worship a God who did what the Bible says God did, how inspiring is that for me to say, hey, you know what? It's not about the guilty person making it right. If God humbled himself and did that, why can't I do that? So I find the image of God the Father seeing a broken relationship with his creation and him taking that first step, that major step, is inspiring for me in how I deal with other people. There's a story in the New Testament that Jesus tells about the prodigal son. It's in a series of other kind of lost things, and it has some other meanings contextually. But I'm just going to talk big picture. And this is, I've read a good book on this. I think it's by Henry Nouwen, and other Christian teachers and philosophers have talked about it. These are not my thoughts. I'm just regurgitating stuff that I like. But the Prodigal Son Story. If you don't know it, it's this story that Jesus tells of, there's this father and he's the head of this family, and his youngest son comes to him and says, Dad, basically, can I have my inheritance? I want to leave. So let's pretend you're dead and give me the money that I'm going to get when you do die, because I want to go on, I want to take off. And so the father gives the kid the money. The kid takes off, squanders his money in some faraway land, and ends up destitute, poor, none of it's left, and he's wasted his life. He decides to come home because he thinks that's the only thing I can do is go home again. But he's full of shame about it. He kind of comes home hunchedly and worried, and I know I'm never going to be a son again. Maybe I can just be a servant in my father's house, kind of thing. The father, who was still at home, from a distance sees the prodigal son returning. And the father, the Bible says, or Jesus said, picks up his robes and runs out of his house down the street to meet his returning son. He has such joy and love for his son. And, apparently culturally at the time, for a man to run would have been seen as shameful. If you're important, you walk. Children run. Men don't run. To pick up your robe so that you could run would show your legs off. Apparently that was also culturally taboo for men to do, which, if you've ever been on a beach with some middle-aged guys around, you can appreciate that rule. Maybe we should have kept that one. But this man, this father, loved his son so much, loved his child so much, that he was willing to be embarrassed and shamed by his culture to run out and wrap his cloak around his son and welcome him back to the house. That is a beautiful story about the love of a father. That's the kind of dad that I wish I could be, that I try to be. If you're a mother or a father or a brother or a sister or a son or a daughter or a friend of somebody, that's an inspirational way to be. Do we love the people in our lives so much that we'll put cultural taboos aside and we're going to express that love in big ways? And even if they wrong us, we're going to find a way to do that. Can we forgive and welcome back, with open arms and hearts, running towards the people who've hurt us? To me, that's inspiring stuff. Okay. What I don't like, the stuff I have a problem with this. So this Christian story of salvation, I can recall years later it being explained to me again using this analogy. Okay, this was someone else's analogy of what the story of salvation is. They're like, okay, listen, it's like you're driving your car, and all of a sudden, a cop pulls you over. Okay, I'm like, okay, and they're like, the cop gets you to roll down the window, and they're like, sir, you have been driving and you've been speeding. I've been following you for a while. You didn't see me, but I was following you. You made some incorrect turns. You were speeding. And I would say, well, I thought I made correct turns. And he's like, no, you can't turn on a red light in this city. And I would say, oh, I didn't know that. There was no sign saying that. What, that was wrong? Yes, that was wrong. You were going over 50. The speed limit's 50 here. Oh, well, there was no signs for a speed limit. I thought it was 60. That's what it is in my town. Okay, well, no, it's 50 here, and you're going 55, so you were speeding. Okay, and ignorance of the law is no excuse. So you've committed these, and I say, okay, well, all right, well, how much is the ticket? And he'd be like, well, actually, the ticket is the death penalty. We have to kill you because you did these things. And but you should know that this other guy agreed to be killed for you, to be killed in your place. So how do you feel? What do you think about that? Essentially, and I just kind of I was like, wow, that I think to a lot of folks, that is what the salvation story sounds like. You're guilty even without knowing the rules. The punishment is severe. Somebody already paid your fine. Now, don't you feel grateful? Well, yeah, I'm glad I don't have to die. But we have some problems here. And the first major problem is, in this salvation story, salvation is about saving, right? And the question becomes, who's the villain? Saving from what? Saving from who? In the the Marvel movies I mentioned earlier, and Tony Stark, he does the snap. He's there in that position to save people because of Thanos, right? Thanos is the big bad guy. He's got the gauntlet. He's got the power. He does the bad thing. He kills half of life in the universe. He sets the table. He creates the game board on which Tony has to play. In this story, this salvation story, who is Jesus saving us from? Who's Thanos? And some Christians might say, oh, well, it's us. It's people. We make bad decisions. We've decided to, do this and do that and go our own way, and we're the cause of the evil in the world that Jesus had to save us from. Yeah, okay. Some people might say the devil. In the Christian circles that I traveled in, the devil was not talked about very much. I think people thought that's kind of silly. Even for a religious place, this is kind of silly, so let's not, come on. But I'm sure many would say it's the devil. Well, God's the good guy, devil's the bad guy, right? He's he did it. But here's the thing: who made people, and who made the devil? Right? In the Christian story, God did. And if God is all-knowing and all-powerful, and he's the creator, why would he make these things that go bad? And if he knew they were going to, isn't he ultimately culpable for what they do? I mean, imagine someone setting up one of those huge, long domino tracks, exactly they want it to be set up, flicking the first domino, and then when domino 102 hits domino 103, and it falls, into the garbage bin, being mad at domino 102 for hitting domino 103 into the garbage bin and punishing them for it. We've been set up here, boys. This is an issue with the story. God is Thanos in this story. And he's Tony Stark. That's wacky. If you kind of just start the salvation story halfway in, Jesus and God look fantastic. If you start at the beginning, not so much. Not so much. The prodigal son story. If the father knew the prodigal son was going to go off and have a rough time of it and come crawling back years later a broken man, he wouldn't have let him go in the first place. Why would he? Why would he? And if he knew what was going to happen and he let him go, isn't he kind of responsible for that? Now, maybe, in our human understanding, there is some sort of adversity creates diamonds kind of argument here, right? Where, look, just God knows we have to go through this adversity in order to grow. And there's no other way through it. Okay, maybe. Maybe the prodigal son is a better son now because he went off and, lived with the pigs for a while. Maybe. But that argument totally falls through when we get to our next flaw, which really is the big one for me, and that is hell. The concept of hell. The concept that, we were created in a relationship with God. Because of our sin, we broke that relationship, and because of that, we go to hell. Unless we take advantage of the forgiveness offered through Christ. We go to hell. The Bible talks about a lake of fire, right? And I'm not saying it's cartoony. I'm not saying there's a red guy with horns and a pitchfork, I'm not saying that, but this is not a good place. And people are there forever. Lake of fire. That sounds like burning to me. I mean, much weeping and gnashing of teeth. I mean, guys, just off the start with hell, I have to say, as someone, again, who came into religion from the outside, and because of, I think, my family and had friends who weren't Christian, I always sort of maintained this outside perspective on it, even when I was in it. This concept is ridiculous. It is silly to me. I mean, it's the ultimate childish concept. If you lie to your parents, you'll burn forever. If you keep making that face, it'll stay that way. I mean, it's ludicrous, this idea that a loving God would punish with pain forever anything that you did in life. There is nothing you could do in one lifetime that was so bad it warranted unending torture. Like, it's ridiculous, guys. And if you don't see it as ridiculous, then okay, let's take it seriously. Let's take a closer look at it. I mean, imagine for a second, and I know this is going to get a bit weird, but bear with me. I mean, imagine for a second how angry you'd have to be to burn somebody else. I mean, if you ever held your hand over a candle flame or near the fire, maybe you have been burnt here or there. It hurts like a mother. Okay? Imagine how angry you'd have to be to do that to somebody else. I mean, in the Game of Thrones novels, I haven't seen the shows, but I know in the novels, Gregor Clegane holds his brother's face in the fire, the Hound, as kids, I think, and burns half his face. What was that, maybe 15 seconds he did that for? 10 seconds? It was horrible. And that was enough information to horrify us and to completely vilify Gregor. And as well it should. That was 15 seconds, and he just burnt half his face. I mean, relatively speaking, it's not so bad, right? Now, what if you burnt someone? How mad would you have to be at someone, or how evil would you have to be to burn someone until they died, burn them alive? And how long would that take? Does that take 30 seconds? Does it take a minute? Does it take 5 minutes? I mean, however long it takes, it's too long. But imagine doing that to somebody. Imagine doing that to somebody you loved. Imagine a serial killer was able to find a way to burn people alive, but keep them alive for longer so that they were in pain longer. Let's say they kept them alive for 8, 9, 10 hours of burning before they died. They can't pass out. They can't die. Somehow their flesh is not completely consumed, and they can just feel that burn for hours and hours and hours. I mean, we would lock that person up and throw away the key or just kill him. There would be no question about it. Right? That's an instant villain. But according to, I know there's different thoughts on hell, and I get that, and I acknowledge that. But Christian doctrine, generally speaking, for years and years and years, the thought is that's what hell's like. And basically, Christians are saying God is loving, God is good, Jesus is loving, Jesus is good. But they also believe that God is able to deal with creating people, letting them live a life, then die, then go to hell and be burnt. Not for 15 seconds, not for 10 hours, forever. This is silly, guys. There's no way you can say that's a loving God to me. There is no person. Hitler doesn't deserve forever burning. I mean, give him 3 years. I don't know. Forever? Forever. Now, I know some people say, okay, it's actually not fire, but it is separation. It's an eternal separation from God. That's more what it is. It's not fire. That's crazy. We've got it wrong. And fine, I'll give you that. So what you're saying is those who don't believe and become Christians while they have their, whatever X number of years window on in this world, they have an eternal conscious mind alone, knowing that they're separated from the only source of heat and light in the universe. Oh. Okay, that doesn't sound so bad. I thought there was going to be fire. That's fine then. An eternal alone conscience. That's consciousness, sorry. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you for that. I mean, come on. It's silly. It's silly. I could go on and on. Hell, it drives me nuts. Now, I think it's true that most Christians, how did this look in reality for me when I was at a church? Most Christians don't really think about it. They don't really talk about it. Christianity is this great big subject with so many things in it. The Bible is long. Try reading it. There's lots in there, and people gravitate towards different things. And there's so much there that you can intentionally gloss over the stuff you don't like and just kind of keep reading the stuff you do like. I know that's what I did. But one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I need to bring up the parts that I don't like, and you need to too. I can remember hearing a Christian theologian named Brian McLaren talk about the implications of your theology. And essentially, if you are someone who believes in eternal punishment and torment, that's one thing to believe that. But because of that belief, you are probably going to be more likely open to people punishing and tormenting. So maybe it might affect your view on torturing prisoners of war to get information, or how you deal with criminals, or so on. That whatever you think God is like, that's what you're going to tend to be like. And there is enough fodder I think, in the Christian religion, that there's room there to make God in your image, however you want that to be, and then use that to further your ends. And so, I know I'm not here to convince anyone of the truth or untruth of any of this, because I don't know what's what. But I do think it's important to be aware of that. And to see a link between what parts of the Bible, what parts of theology, what parts of salvation people grab onto, and what parts they let go. I mean, I tended to bump into, really three kinds of people when I went to church. One kind of person was just there because it was nice, and that's just what they always did. And they weren't really that invested in the material, in the source material. And then there tended to be people who were very interested in the religious stuff. It wasn't just a social club. They were interested in the theology. And those people would either be huge Jesus fans who were all about love and forgiveness and serving the poor and, you know, let's do better. And then there were people there who loved the authority that God had, and I think had some of their own bigotry and hate on for other people and other groups, and they had found a place that accepted that about them and encouraged it. They had found a book and a faith that said, yeah, that's right. Non-Christians are heathen. Yeah, that's right. You know, these people, most of them are going to hell for the rock and roll, you know, or whatever. And whenever I'd bump into someone like that, I was always like, man, how are we in the same building? Like, we're dressed the same. We kind of look the same. We're speaking the same sort of Christian language with our words. You know, no one else says sin or, you know, reconcile. Like, no one talks like church people talk. We're talking the same language, but we are from different places, and we're going different places. And I would encourage you to examine yourself. And if you know some Christians, talk to them about it. What do they like about it? It's a much more important question than is someone a Christian or not, than the question of what inspires them, what thinking and talking gives them life, where do they see beauty. I much prefer Christ-likeness to devout religiosity. All right, I think that's enough for today. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you next week.